I have a real shot of becoming the Dale Carnegie of this generation. Man, this Brenden guy's overwhelming. I can't deal with this guy.
Welcome to Inspired by Success, the podcast where I deep dive into the mindset of successful entrepreneurs, CEOs, and thought leaders. Get ready to be inspired and gain valuable insights to unlock your true potential.
Transform your financial future with this episode sponsored by KE Financial Services.
Our guest today is committed to empowering future leaders by removing communication barriers. With a successful YouTube channel, he offers hundreds of free tutorials on public speaking and leadership to over 35,000 subscribers. Believing everyone should have life-changing skills, he helps people gain confidence and abilities to become influential leaders and change makers. Join us as we learn how the sought-after speaker and coach transformed his university presentation competition experience into a movement for mastering communication. Get ready to gain confidence and public speaking skills to make a lasting impact with Brenden from MasterTalk's. Welcome to the show.
Hey, it's great to be here, Linda. Thanks for having me.
Tell us about your journey and what inspired you to start your YouTube channel, MasterTalk.
Yeah, for sure. So the journey started when I was in college, like you said very well in the intro. I did these things called case competitions when I was studying in business school. Think of it like professional sports, but for nerds. So while other guys my age were playing footy or rugby or cricket or some other sport you probably wouldn't see me playing, Linda, I did presentations competitively. That's how I learned how to talk. But then as I got older, Linda, I started coaching other people on how to speak, mostly students back then, because they were really smart, but they weren't winning competitions. So I just started helping them with communication. I wasn't really good back then, but it was just fun because the option they had was either me or nobody. And then as the years went on, I had coached 40 to 50 people on speaking, and I had a great job at IBM lined up. So I wasn't really looking to be an influencer or anything like that. I just realized in my last semester of college, this was 5 years ago at this point, that, hey, nobody's sharing any of the tips that I was sharing with the students online for free. So I started making videos. I called it Master Talk, and it led into something I never would have imagined.
That's crazy. And I've watched your content. It's very, very useful. So guys, if you haven't already, just check it out. And if you really want to learn the skill of communication and public speaking, I highly recommend you check it out, because this skill is crucial, especially in business and everyday life. If you want to sell ourselves, if you want to have a business opportunity. So it is a crucial skill that you need to have. So tell me, why do we struggle so much with public speaking?
The reason I believe we struggle with communication, Linda, is because of the education system. Think about it. When is the first time or the first few times that we present in a formal setting? For most of us, the answer is school. High school, elementary school, history teacher comes up to us and says, Brenden, Linda, I need you to give a presentation on the Renaissance. And we're like, what is that? Like a fruit or something? And then we realize that it's a time period of history. And then we'd have to talk about Shakespeare and poetry. And all of these presentations, Linda, have three fundamental problems to them. The first problem, like I was alluding to earlier, is that they're all mandatory. You don't wake up in the morning and say, hey, Linda, you want to get breakfast and present all day? Like, nobody says that. Like, it's something we're forced to do. The second challenge is all of the presentations that we deliver are not on a topic we get to pick. So it's not, hey, Linda, what are you passionate about? Are you passionate about self-development? Are you passionate about video games, e-commerce, vending machines, entrepreneurship? Yeah, you got to talk about Shakespeare and poetry. You don't really have a choice in the matter. And the third challenge, which is the most important one of all, Linda, is that every presentation you do, 100% of them are tied to a punishment. So if you don't do a great job, not only do you not get a pat on the back, you get a slap in the face, and you lose 30% of your grade. And that gets repeated and conditioned in our mind over and over and over again for most of our life. So it's no wonder we grew up being afraid of it.
Yeah, that's so true. But you've studied all these celebrities and CEOs and their presentations and styles. And on your channel, it's like how to present, like Bill Gates, for example. Who's been your favorite and why?
Yeah, that's such a hard question. So many great speakers. I always like to say is I'm the amalgamation or the combination of one or two things that I take from everybody, whether it's Bill Gates, whether it's Gary Vee and whatnot. But if I had to pick a favorite, I think the best speaker in the world right now is pretty hard to debate. It's probably Tony Robbins because of his ability to command an audience. Sure, he has his criticisms, but I don't think there's a single speaker in the world who can hold somebody's attention for 13 hours straight where you don't want to take a bathroom break. And guilty as charged. I've seen him speak in person, and I did not want to go to the bathroom. I just stood there. I mean, I sat there for 13 hours and I just took a bunch of notes. He's incredible at what he does, and I really think he's in a category of his own for sure.
Wow. I have heard him speak and I watch him as well. I noticed that he speaks a lot and sometimes he doesn't let you speak. What are your thoughts on that? Because I've had guests that I speak and they're different personality type. They're very extroverted. And then I'm not an introvert, but I'm not an extrovert. So I see myself in between. But what are your thoughts on that? When someone is really extremely loud and out there, how do you speak to someone like that?
It's a great point you're bringing up, Linda. So the way that I think about it is communication is like juggling 18 balls at the same time, right? I don't think anyone is a master speaker in the world truly, where one of those balls is what ums and ahs, one of them is eye contact, one of them is pacing, one of them is knowing how to listen. And I would argue every human being in the world doesn't have all 18 balls. So in Tony's case, he has a lot of things going from speaking stamina. I think he's probably number one in the world. Vocal projection, the voice that commands you into action. I mean, it's obvious because tens of thousands of people attend his seminars, but he doesn't have the full collection, right? Sometimes he talks a little too fast. So it's really hard for somebody who's English as a second language who's following this stuff. They have to rewatch Tony speak like 5 times, or else they'll lose everything that he's saying. And he has a very aggressive tone sometimes, so it's really hard for him to follow. So the advice then becomes, Linda, what I think the pro should do and what I tend to do is I go, what are the good things from Tony that I can take? And what are the bad things that I can avoid? So like to your point, when I'm speaking to an introvert, I change my tone completely. Right, I'm always speaking in a softer tone. Whereas if I'm keynoting in front of 1,000 people, of course I'm going to bring a little bit more extroversion to get people excited about my message.
Wow. And what are the biggest mistakes people make when it comes to public speaking and communication too? Because you mentioned the fillers. As I have an issue where sometimes I might say a certain word, like I had to watch myself to realize this, but the word, is something that I say a lot. And I hear people say a lot. And so I'm more aware of that. But what other mistakes do you see people make?
Yeah, for sure. Ums and ahs is definitely a big one. And I'm happy to share the solutions. I'm sharing the mistakes. So the solution to that is you replace your ums and ahs with pausing. So let's say we take John loves apples. Most people say John loves apples. So what you want to force yourself to do is whenever you don't know what you're going to say next, you pause. You go, John loves apples. That's what I think you have to really force yourself to do that. There's a bunch of mistakes, but I'll just give you the big 3. The second one that I've noticed is eye contact. So a lot of the times, whether people are speaking in person, whether in a conversation, or whether in an online meeting like the one that we're on right now, Linda, is they generally don't keep their eyes on their audience. They move their eyes down, their voice is really shaky, they're moving around all the time. In person, they look really defeated. So you want to keep your eyes at the level of your audience so that you're perceived as confident. And then the third big mistake, and I'll throw it back to you, is audience mastery. Most people don't take the time to just ask the simple question. Hey, Linda, if you had to change one thing about my speech or about my interview today, what would you change? If there was one thing that you would communicate differently about my presentation, what would you change? Hey, if you were me, how would you explain my ideas to the world? Taking the time to have dinner with your audience and asking them these questions is really what ensures that what you're sending across is being implemented on the other side.
Wow, that's interesting. And I've noticed other things too when I speak to certain guests as well. And I've been guilty of this mistake myself because it's the art of storytelling. And that is a hard skill I've noticed a lot of people don't get right because I have done it myself. I jump from beginning to over here to there. You tend to jump so it doesn't flow. And I've been made aware of that. So I'm more aware of it when I have to interview people as well. So what are your tips on that? And how can we master the art of storytelling so that it's smooth and it flows, but it's concise as well? Because you don't want to drift off topic and go over there and distract away from the key message.
Absolutely, Linda. So Les Brown has a great quote on this, which is never make a point without telling a story and never tell a story without making a point. What does he mean by this quote, Linda? What he means is that every great story has a key lesson. We all have that friend in our life who goes, Linda, you can't believe what happened to me yesterday. And we're thinking, yeah, what happened yesterday? And then they start talking, and 20 minutes later,
They
not
don't
like
even
2 minutes, like,
yeah.
yeah, you have like no idea, like what happened. And you get a little frustrated, like all of us do. And that is a prime example of a story without a lesson, even if the story is comedic or fun in nature. So, the trick to great storytelling, Linda, is you need to start with the lesson first. Make a bunch of lessons or stuff that you want to teach people, and then look into your life for the story that corresponds to that lesson. So if, for example, in my life, the lesson I always teach, which is the main outcome of every podcast I do, is really to convince anybody that they could be a great speaker. But then what is the story that convinces people of that? Well, it's my personal story, right? I have a
Mm.
degree in accounting. I have a disability in my left arm. It's crooked because of an accident I had in birth. And I spent my whole life presenting in a second language because I live in Montreal in Canada. And in Montreal, you need to not speak French, which is a language I didn't know. So I was scared to death of speaking for most of my life. So if I could do it, anyone can. But notice how the story ties in well with the lesson.
Wow, that's beautiful. And let's talk about tone of voice and body language, because I think that's really important as well. And I've been guilty of this as well, doing presentations where I'm very monotone and very boring sometimes. So I have to be mindful of that too. But tell us any tips of that. I've heard great speakers, their tone goes up and down, so it's not so boring, and the energy level. I think energy is very crucial in that too. But what are your thoughts on that?
Absolutely. So when it comes to body language and tone, let's cover those two topics separately. So for body language, Linda, the idea is to focus on what not to do versus what to do. Because most of us don't really make big mistakes with our body language. Like in this meeting that we're having together, you're not like throwing your hands up in the air, like you're not really making any mistakes with body language. So it's really mostly focused on what you shouldn't do. So some examples could be, don't put your hands really tight together. Don't put your hands in your pockets. Don't put your hands behind your back. This is an interesting one. I got this from Alan Peace, who's a body language expert, where he says that if people don't see your palms, they think you're hiding something. So you want to make sure you show your palms to the people you're speaking to. Those are just some examples. And then, of course, the one I demonstrated a little earlier, the hand ninja, don't move your hands a little bit too much.
Mm.
That's the piece. Just focus on what to avoid versus what to do, and you'll be fine. Tone of voice is a little bit more complicated, but the general idea, and I'll give an example, Linda, is whenever we speak, exceptional communicators vary their vocal when they speak. Example, let's do two together. John loves apples. He goes to the store every day to find one. Notice how I keep the same tone, so it's very boring, versus John goes to the store every day. He goes to the store to get one. So even if the second was a little butchered, notice how it sounds a lot better because I'm going up and down like a roller coaster. So you need to vary your tones.
Wow. Okay, so what about the days where you've had a miserable day, you haven't had enough sleep, the kids are driving you crazy, kids were sick last night, but you have a presentation the next morning and you have to try and nail it to win a business or something like that? What are your tips on that when you're not feeling 100%, but you need to present yourself in a way to win over who you're presenting to, especially with sales, because there are sometimes when you get rejected and stuff. When I was in sales before, I used to get rejected a lot, and it's just picking the phone up and doing it again and then picking that energy, but you're feeling deflated. So how can we present better despite feeling deflated?
Absolutely, Lynn. And I totally agree. I get rejected all the times in sales meetings, so I could totally relate to that. And there's two parts to that question. One is tactics, second is mindset. So mindset really quick is really going back to the why we're doing this. Whenever we get rejected, whenever we're feeling low, we always look at the frame from the next couple of steps. We don't take the 1,000 bird view and go, why am I in sales? Why am I selling this product? Why am I doing this thing? And reconnecting with our why doesn't solve the whole problem, but it definitely solves part of the problem. That's happened to me a lot. I remember this one time a few years ago. I was asked to give a keynote in front of 150 kids, and I found out 10 minutes before the training that I had to do it in two languages simultaneously, like at the same time, because it was a French audience. I know how to speak French, but it's my second language, so I didn't prep to do it in French. So I said, okay. And I just reconnected with why am I here? I'm here to serve the kids. And if I screw this up, if I mess this up, Well, the kids go, well, he's a communication expert, so if he messes up on stage, I don't think I could be a great speaker, and that was unacceptable to me.
Yeah.
That's mindset.
Yeah.
But I think the tactics is more interesting, Linda, because we all know the mindset part. Let's talk about the tactics. Somebody told me this. I don't know who it is, but some Navy SEAL told me this. He says, Brenden, we never rise up to the level of our potential. We always default to the level of our training. We never rise up to the level of our potential when things get stressful. That's the context he means. Like in the army, like when you're at war, you don't really rise up to the level of your potential. Like today, I'm going to rise up to them. No, you default to the level of your training. And one example of that to make this simple, because we haven't talked about RQView yet, is just like 3 speaking exercises people can do right now and get results. One of them is called the random word exercise, where you take a word like phone or zebra and you create a 60-second presentation out of thin air. But here's the thing, Linda. If you do that exercise once, you won't be that confident. But if you do that exercise 100 times, you talk about a bunch of random words, when you go back to sales or something you actually know, life becomes very easy.
Oh, wow. You've worked with so many different people, executives, and all walks of life. What key communication challenges do they typically face?
For sure. And what's fascinating, Linda, is they all have different challenges that they bring up, but the solution is the same. So we can talk about that too. So the challenge that my execs bring up, who are the vast majority of my clientele, right, really fall under the 3 pillars of how I coach them: presentation mastery, leadership mastery, and relationship building mastery. So presentation mastery means whenever they're speaking in a boardroom, whenever they're sharing an idea, they make a lot of basic mistakes with their comms. Comms just means communication for those who are listening. So that means they say a bunch of ums and ahs. Their eye contact's around the place. They speak too quickly because they're nervous. They want to get the presentation over with. They don't look really excited to be there. So the first part of that is really refining presentation skills. The second piece, which is leadership mastery, is the challenge that they kind of know but aren't fully aware of, which is communication is not just about presenting. It's every area of your speaking. It's the way you deliver feedback to your teams. Are you delivering feedback in a way that they leave inspired, like, wow, or are they leaving informed? There's a big difference there. Because if they leave informed, they go, oh my God, I don't want to go to the next feedback call next quarter with Brenden and Linda. I am not looking forward to this. Versus what leaders do is they still give you the same feedback. They just deliver it differently. So instead of going, okay, Linda, look, you messed up the X, Y, and Z. We need to fix this because the client is really mad. Versus, Linda, I just want to acknowledge you for all the incredible work that you're doing. Let's just focus on these 2 or 3 things together and create a game plan so that when we go back to the client, we really get a higher NPS score. Same advice, but it's delivered completely differently. That's one. Second piece is meetings. A lot of people suck at meetings, Linda, to make a long story short. Hey, what's the status update on this meeting? You go, I talked to my boss, I talked to HR, and they're like, where are you going with this? Instead of talking like, this is the point, these are the 3 reasons why, here's the result. And these are just some examples of challenges I see. And relationship building is another one too.
Wow. So what do you recommend in terms of how can people improve their communication skills?
Absolutely. So going back to this 18 ball analogy, right, where communication is like juggling 18 balls at the same time. And you've done a great job of trying to cover as many of those as possible, right? Body language, tone of voice, ums and ahs. But the question I've asked myself as a communication expert and professional, maybe not expert, but at least a professional in the space, is I said, okay, to impact the most number of people, what are the 3 easiest balls to juggle? Because if we know the 3 easiest balls to juggle, we don't need to overthink it. Because tone of voice is a little harder to implement. Getting rid of ums and ahs is simple, but not easy. You got to practice a long time. But these 3 balls, easy to do. So are we covered, which is the random word exercise. Do that every day. If you got children, you're listening to this podcast, do it with your kids, do it with your family members, do it with people in your life, especially if you can't afford a coach. Just find people in your life, do the exercise. Q, the question drill. We're practicing it right now. Every single day, ask a question that you think people will ask you about your expertise. So when I did my first interview, I sucked, Linda. I remember some guy asked me the same question you asked me in some sense, which is, where does the fear of communication come from? And I didn't know the answer. I was like, I don't know, Brisbane? Dubai? You tell me, man. Like, I don't know the fear. It sucked.
Yes. So how did you
So
overcome that?
yeah, I did it.
Edit that
I
one out.
screwed.
Just say edit that out.
Yeah, I didn't even edit that out. But yeah, I just messed up the interview. And then I re-answered that question on my own. But for people who don't have a podcast or aren't being interviewed, the question still
Mm,
applies. You
mm,
mentioned a great example, Linda, which is sales meetings, right? You're being
mm,
asked questions all the time in sales. And then the other piece is job interviews, right? It's like you're being
mm,
asked, tell me about yourself a million times. And then V is
mm.
sending video messages to people you love.
Wow. Okay. So let's go back to the job interviews and Zoom. We've all had to do it now for the past few years. How can we present better virtually as well and for job interviews? So there will probably be two separate questions there, but selling yourself is one thing for the job interview, but the Zoom thing, how do you sell yourself over Zoom virtually?
For sure, Linda. And two great questions. So the first piece, let's focus on the job interviews. Really simple. Write down the answers to the questions you're getting. So if you want to apply for a specific job, let's say a job in project management, what you want to do, if you want to take this advice to the nth degree, like absolutely implement 100%, you either Google what are the top 10 questions
Mm,
that project managers get asked. There's YouTube videos on this. Like there's so many people, you can just Google this, that are giving this information for free. Like this podcast is free, right? You just go and you just listen. So it's the same thing. The other thing that you can do that I really like is to go on LinkedIn and coffee chat people who have the job that you want. And you're not getting a job out of them. You're just talking to them and just saying, hey, what questions did you get in the interview? And they'll say A, B, C, D, E, F, G. And you're like, right, thank you for all the gold. And you write down all these questions. And then every day, all you have to do is get your favorite cup of coffee, cup of tea. It doesn't matter what it is. Sit down on your back porch and write out the answer to each of those questions. And if you do that, because most people don't do that, let's face it, Linda, you're going to crush your competition. So that's the point on that. The point
mm-hmm,
on Zoom calls, all the same tips apply, Linda. The only difference is three main distinctions I'll make really quick. The first one is eye contact. So when you're in person, you're moving your body around to the people that you're speaking to because it's a group.
yeah.
Whereas when you're online, whether it's 1 or 10,000 people, you're only supposed to look in one direction, which is the camera lens of
Mm,
your laptop or PC. So just keep your eyes on the lens, put a post-it note and says, look here or else or something like that. So that's one. Number two is energy. Let's face it, it's a lot easier to show up with energy, Linda, when you're in person
mm,
versus when you're on a Zoom call. So what do? Really simple. Get better in person. Bring more energy in person and transfer as much of that energy as possible to the Zoom call, to the Riverside, to the recording that you're doing, right? So you can imagine I'm bringing this much energy and it's just me alone in my basement. Imagine if you met me in person, you're like, man, this Brenden guy's overwhelming. I can't deal with this guy. So that's two. And then the third difference I'll throw back to you is audience mastery. Audience mastery just means when you're in person, let's say I'm giving a presentation in Australia and you're in front of me and you have feedback for me, there's no friction. So you just go, hey, you're right, Brenden, I got some feedback. Oh, let's just get lunch, Linda. And you're just going to give me some feedback and I'll take it down. I'll say, oh, that's a great point. But online, the Zoom call just ends. So you
mm.
have to take the time to call people and get the feedback you need.
Awesome. Yeah, I definitely always ask for feedback afterwards. Let's talk about some non-obvious skills that make someone a really good communicator, like empathy and listening. How crucial is listening? Because when I'm interviewing people, sometimes there needs to be a pause. I think a great guest knows when to pause, especially when you're speaking to someone. Even for a job interview, this can apply too. So the ability to be able to listen and not over talk, but be able to have good conversational flows and not just listen just to respond, but active listening as well and being empathetic. Can you give me your thoughts and advice on that?
Absolutely. And it's a skill I need to keep working on, honestly, Linda, because that's one of my flaws. I always
Mm,
talk too much when I'm on
mm.
podcasts. So I look at the time and it's like, oh, I've been rambling for 4 minutes now. I got to stop and throw it back. So,
No, I
yes.
think it's good. You're doing a great job.
Oh, thanks, Linda. I like to think I do, but I need some work like all of us. But also to say, the point I really want to focus on from your question around listening is we know how important it is. But the next level question becomes that I get a lot. Well, how do you practice this? How do you practice listening? And for somebody like you, it's easy because you got a podcast. You're kind of forced to listen to the guest, which I
Mm.
mean, I know you enjoy it too, but that's what makes your listening experience. So, how can we make a universal tip? So, I had to create one because I didn't really see anything out there in the space. I'll give it to you. It's called the goals call. So
The
here's what you
what?
do. The goals call, like a goal. So
Hmm.
here's what you do. It's very simple. Pick anybody in your life. Ideally, somebody you get along with. Like somebody fun. It could be a significant other. At least I hope they're fun in your case if you're listening to this. Right? A child of yours if they're old enough. A best friend from college. Somebody with a growth mindset. Just anybody that you're comfortable with. That's down for new experiences. Sit them down for a 45-minute Zoom call. It could be in person or it could be over Zoom, whatever is more convenient. And this is the flow of the call. The first 5 minutes of the call, you just ask that person, write down on a piece of paper what are your top 3 goals for the year and why are those goals important to you. Top 3 goals for the year, why are those goals important to you? So that person spends 5 minutes, they write out their 3 things. Then after the 5 minutes go by, Linda, they start sharing what are their goals. As soon as they're done, you restate everything that you heard. Just to make sure I understood everything, Linda, your goals are A, B, and C. Health goal, finance goal, career goal, doesn't matter, relationship goal. And here's why these goals are important to you. Did I get it right? And most of the times you get it right, but they'll start to add more things because you're creating a safe space. Oh, actually, Brendan, now that you mentioned that, let me add more things. And they start talking more. Then you restate again. And here's the catch. For the rest of the 40 minutes that remain on the call, you are not allowed. Let me repeat this again. You are not allowed to give advice. You're only allowed to do 2 things on that call. One is ask them more questions around their goals, and 2, repeat what they said. That's it. So let's say that person, Linda, says, I want to make more money. So a natural clarifying question would be, well, how much did you make this year? How much do you want to make next year? Where do you think that money will come from? And this really helps people. You do this with 10 people, you'll be an exceptional listener.
Wow, that's great advice. Okay, so what if somebody that you're speaking to is an introvert? How do you help somebody who's an introvert, especially when it feels so unnatural to them? I've had guests that just say the very basic and then there's a length of silence and it's like, you know what I mean? They're very introverted. So how do you deal with that and how can you get the most out of an introvert when it comes to public speaking and answering your questions or just communicating in general with an introvert?
Absolutely, Linda. So there's 2 parts to that. The first part is creating an introverted version of RQV. So let's recap RQV for the team. The random word exercise where you pick a word like phone, create a 60-second presentation. So with the random word, when I'm talking to an introvert, when I explain this to them, who said you have to do this in front of other people? Do this in your house. Do this alone. Do this in the shower. Do this when you're walking your dog. You don't even have to talk. You can just think about the exercise. So that way, there's no pressure. You don't even have to make videos. That's fine. Q, question drills. Who said you need to ask questions in front of other people? You don't need to be in an interview like me. You don't need to practice job interviews. You could just write out the answers on a piece of paper alone, locked up in a basement. And then when you're done, I'm really making the exaggerations to make the point here. Because 70% of my clients are introverts, right? So obviously, as you can imagine, I'm comfortable. I've had to find ways of getting them to do stuff.
Mm.
And then you open your phone and there's a free voice recorder app. It doesn't matter if you have an iPhone or an Android. You could find this on a Google Play Store or whatever. And you just voice out the answers in front of nobody. That's Q. And V, okay, you're scared to send video messages to random people? Send video messages to your mom. Send a video message to your significant other. Send a video message to your sister. And heck, if that still scares you, send a video message to yourself. Every single day, send a video message to yourself saying one thing you like about yourself. There you go. Done. And if you do RQView, like I've experienced with my clients, you won't be that nervous anymore. You just need an excuse to do the thing in a way you're comfortable with. And then once you get there, you're good. And the last piece that I'll leave on this question for introverts is introverts often don't realize, Linda, that they're very powerful as speakers in some areas that I'm actually really bad at. And those areas are listening. I had to learn listening because I'm an extra. I love to talk. That's why I'm a great podcast guest, horrible podcast host. That's why I don't host podcasts. I guest on them, and I know that. The second one is it was accessibility. Brene Brown's pretty accessible when she talks. Not Gary Vaynerchuk. When Gary Vaynerchuk talks, you listen to him, you go, oh my God, this guy is super annoying. He's super loud. But when you're more introverted like Brene, everybody loves you. So that's another example.
Wow. Okay, let's talk about empathy and how we communicate when we have a disagreement. So when we say we're having a fight with our partner or a disagreement with a work colleague, how can we communicate more empathy when we go through these issues without causing all the friction as well? How do you keep that in? Tell us what your tips are.
Absolutely, Linda. So the approach that I like to take, with hard conversations, always practice on easy people. I don't like going to the hard thing right away. Because the problem is, like, I give advice, and then they're like, yeah, but I can't, I'm scared of my boss. It's like, well, who said you had to start with your boss? Start
Mm.
with somebody easy, like a significant other, hopefully, once again, hopefully. And for the people listening, they're the easy person. There's three A's to this game. The first one is appreciation, especially in personal relationship. Just start any argument and say, hey, Linda, I just really appreciate your tenacity in running your ecom business. Something like that. Doesn't matter what the appreciation is, as long as it's meaningful and specific. People will go, I don't know what it is about Brenden, but I like Brenden. Okay, people like compliments. That's one. The second piece is agreement. So agreement was whenever you disagree with something, and my business partners and I, we disagree all the time. That's normal. That's why we're good partners, because we bring different perspectives to the table. So if I violently disagree with 95% of what my business partner is saying, I'll always start with the 5% we're on the same page with. It's rare that it's 95%, but if it's 95%, I'll say, you know what, Vamsi, I agree with you on ABC. So start with that. So that way you start on the same ground. It's like, okay, we're agreeing somewhere. We're still on the same team. It's like a mental reminder that it's not Brenden versus Linda. It's Brenden and Linda against the problem, right? So that's the second piece. That's agreement. And then the third one is acknowledgement. So acknowledgement means, hey, I like what you shared around this. And you're rephrasing, hey, I'm acknowledging your share. I'm understanding this is your perspective. Did I get that correctly? And that person says yes. Now here's my vantage point. Here's my perspective. But I first need to acknowledge that I understood you. So an example of that would be, let's say you're talking, blah, blah, blah. We did the appreciation, we did the agreement. Now we go to the acknowledgement. I go, just to make sure I understood you, Linda, did you mean X? The reason you're concerned is because of this. And then you go, yes or no. And then when you say yes, then I go, but here's the perspective I want to bring. So when you're doing it that way, you're really showing up as a leader because you're telling them, hey, me understanding your perspective is just as valuable to me as me sharing my own perspective. And if you do it that way, my God, you won't have any problems. And that's why me, my sister, my mother haven't fought in over 10 years, even if we live together.
Wow, very encouraging. That's great. You mentioned leaders as well. So, how can leaders empower their team with strong communication skills? Because everybody should have that skill. Everybody, no matter if you're an introvert or an extrovert. How can they help their team get better at it?
We could have a 1 hour conversation just on that one question. But to keep it really simple today, Linda, the goal is leaders teach what they know to other people. Very simple. The best leaders are coaches. Like a lot of my executives, they don't think they're coaches. I said, you don't need to be a professional coach like me to be a coach. You are a coach,
Mm.
right? You're coaching your teams on how to perform better. You're coaching your executive team on how to take their game to the next level. So what does that mean in simple terms? Teach RQV to your team. Let's apply this practically. Random word exercise. Pick the least risky meeting that week. Usually it's like a Friday debrief meeting before the weekend. That's usually the meeting. And in that meeting, before that meeting starts, everybody has to do a random word exercise. You do that once, it's scary. You do that every week for a year, it's fun. That's number one. Q, question drill. Same game. Before another meeting, everybody asks one question to each other. That everyone's practice. So in a sales meeting, it's like, what's one question you struggled with this week, Jim? Okay, Jim struggled with this question. How would everyone else in the room answer this question? Boom, best practice. Next, we're going to tackle question number 2. Question number 2 is, this is too expensive. How are we answering that objection? Okay, everybody does it. Next week, do that. V,
Mm.
be the leader. Send video messages to your team members telling them one thing you appreciate about them. Your employees don't need more money. They might, in some cases, need more money, but really what they're looking for is loyalty and appreciation. The one thing I'm really proud of, besides the accomplishments I have at MasterTalk, I have a retention rate of my employees in a business, and I think I'm one of the few people that I know who has this, of 100%. There isn't one person that has worked with me in the beginning who has dropped out. who has quit on me.
Why do
Not
why
one
do you think
person.
that is?
And it's also because I
Why
have a
why?
small team. I think the reason, Linda, is really appreciation and loyalty, right? It's really
Mm.
understanding what are their goals. And I'm sure my record won't stay 100% statistically. It's just impossible. I'm sure one person will leave eventually, but they'll leave a better person. They won't leave worse off because I was their leader. And I think we need to do that with our teams too.
Oh, that's beautiful. Do you have any mentors or books that have really made a huge impact on your life and your mindset, communication skills, whatever? Which books have really impacted you the most? Or if you don't read books, mentors.
For sure. I don't read a lot of books. That's why when I
Mm.
recommend one, it's worth the read. So I'll give you one,
Yeah.
which is Thirst by Scott Harrison. Thirst by Scott Harrison. That's THIRST by Scott Harrison. Scott's the CEO and founder of Charity Water. He built a nonprofit to $300 to $400 million in a decade. He's an absolute star. And I really love his story because he started as a nightclub promoter in New York City. He was one of the best nightclub promoters in the city, and then he hated himself. He hated his life, and then he went on to build the world's largest water charity, hence Charity Water. And it's the shirt that I'm wearing. So yeah, I'm really, really passionate about the work that he's doing. And the reason I recommend this book is from an impact and also a storytelling perspective. I think Scott's one of the best storytellers in the world right now, and I think there's a lot we can learn from the way that he's told the story of Charity Water to get people aligned in his mission. So definitely a must read.
Okay, that's a good one. I'll check that out. Now, let's talk about your brand. Okay. So, you've built a YouTube channel and grew it to over 35,000 subscribers, which is very impressive. Congrats on that. And you're active on YouTube, LinkedIn, and other podcasts. How do you choose which platforms to share certain messages with? And another question is, how have you grown your brand as well into such a big following? Can you give any tips on that? Because I'm curious to know for the YouTube part as well. So, what are your thoughts and any advice on how to grow? Is it consistency? Is it SEO? What methods do you use?
For sure, Linda. I'll give you a philosophy that I don't think is covered enough on podcast. That has nothing to do with SEO and the tactics and all the things together, because you can get somebody else to talk about that. I call this the 520 rule. So the 520 rule is very simple. If you post every week for the next 10 years without missing, that's 520 posts, right? Because every year has 52 weeks in a year. And over the next 10 years, that's 520 posts. And I can pretty much guarantee if you do 520 posts, you keep making each one a little bit better and you improve the quality and you take feedback from your audience, you'll probably become successful. But here's the best part, or it could be the worst part for some people. Most people will never make it 10 years. So even if
Mm.
I'm young, I'm 27 currently, I started creating content when I was 22. And I have been consistent on YouTube since I started in 2019. That's why I have the success I do. So that's the 520 rule. The second rule that I follow is focus on one platform at a time. It's really competitive on social media. If you want to win, you really have to understand the culture. And funny enough, even if I say, here's my YouTube channel, that's what I like to be known for, that is not my most followed account. My most followed account is actually Instagram. I have over 100,000 followers on Instagram. And that happened
Mm.
recently in the last 6 months because I focused on one platform at a time. So I tried YouTube for a few years, and YouTube's getting really tough to grow on right now. So the
Mm.
tips that I used in 2019 unfortunately don't apply anymore because YouTube does not push long form content as much as it used to, unless you're like super, super talented at creation. So these days, my recommendation, which is tip number 3, which platform to focus on first, I always recommend people start with LinkedIn. And the reason is because you already have an existing following, because you're following your friends and they're following you on LinkedIn. So you already have followers. You don't start from zero like Instagram or YouTube or any other following. Number 2, most people don't create content on LinkedIn. And number 3, it is the lowest bar of competition out of all the platforms. Everyone sucks on LinkedIn. Like the bar is so low. Like if YouTube is the NBA, like the basketball team, like the NBA championship leagues, I mean, LinkedIn is like high school basketball, so it's really easy to compete on that platform. And the audience is great. I get most of my money from LinkedIn out of all the platforms. So yeah,
Mm.
go
The
there.
decision makers. Yeah. Oh, nice advice there. Tell me what excites you most about the future.
What excites me most about the future, Linda? When I get this question, I always like to start with gratitude. I'm really grateful that I've been able to achieve something I never thought was even possible 5 years
Mm.
ago. I was just a kid in my mom's basement. I still live with my mom, but it's just a little different archetype. I provide for her now, so it's just I just
Mm.
help her, and the extra cost that I could have spent on another mortgage, we just reinvest back into the business. So yes, I'm very, very grateful for the life that I've had for the last 5 years. I think now looking into the future and who I want to be over the next 5, 10, I have a real shot of becoming the Dale Carnegie of this generation. And it's something that I really take seriously. So I spend a lot of time so that one day people look at me as the example to follow in communication. Because the difference with Dave and me, Dale Carnegie, for those who don't know, is the author of the book How to Win Friends and Influence People, sold millions of copies. But the problem is that he was born in the wrong time period of history because there's no videos of him. I mean, there's some, but it's like really grainy. He was never on a podcast like this. And I get to be that person where here, when I'm gone, if all goes well, people can learn from me forever. And I think that's really powerful.
Wow. Are you making your money mostly from coaching, or is it from monetization of the platform?
I wish it was monetization from the platform. Definitely is not. I make
What does,
$100 a month on
on
YouTube. Even
YouTube?
my follower can, yeah, $100 a month, and I spend 1,000 a month on production. So I'm
No,
losing money.
because yeah, I can totally relate to that because you're spending time and energy in editing and whatnot. And wow, I thought it would have been more. So
Yeah,
most
no.
of the money comes from just the coaching. Is that right?
Oh, 1,000%. And we do well. Don't feel too sorry for me. So the idea is there's different ways you can skin a cat, right? So you can do the monetization game, make $200 a month. Okay, if I have 2 million followers, I'll make $2,000 a month or $5,000 a month. That's cool. But if you're really talented at providing a product or service in the back end of what you create free for the world, that is the best thing. Because if I'm selling a coaching package for 3 to 5,000 or more, I just need 50 people to buy this thing every year. And we're thankful it's a lot more than 50. But the idea is, hey, you know what? If 50 people buy this thing, or 60 people buy this thing, or 70 people buy this thing, I can serve those people to the best of my energy, and everybody else gets free access to me on social media, right? Because they fund the media, and that's just a much better business model. So, yeah, coaching is 90% of the business. 10% of the business is workshops. Like I'm going to corporations and giving workshops, but it's not really a big focus for me.
Wow, that's very interesting. Cool. So what's one key piece of advice you'd like to leave our audience with?
Yeah, in the context of communication, I would say, Linda, the most important piece of advice is a question that I'll ask your audience, which is, how would your life change if you were an exceptional communicator? A lot of us, when we think of speaking, unfortunately, we focus on the negatives. I'm really scared and I'm really nervous. And that's what the culture has conditioned us to believe, that communication is a chore, that it's negative. But it's not a chore right now. We're using communication right now as a medium to impact thousands of people's lives, and if not millions of people's lives through all of our social media accounts. So for you who's listening to this podcast, how is communication going to change your life? Because the number one challenge of communication, I always argue, Linda, is not fear. It's motivation. It's motivation to do Archivio, to do the random word exercise. And for you, it's not starting a podcast, listening to this show. For you, it's probably getting your next promotion at work, having a better relationship with your children, having better friendships, right? Speaking and inspiring people in your community. Whatever that thing is, realize that communication is an accelerant of your dream. I don't care what the dream is, communication helps you get there a lot faster. So master that.
Beautiful. What does success mean to you?
Three parts, Linda. The first part of success to me is spending your time, energy, and resources to find your gift. Doesn't matter what the gift is, whether it's being a stay at home mom, whether it's being a gajillionaire entrepreneur, or whether it's finding a career that you love as a plumber because nobody else wants to be a plumber and you're the best plumber in town. Whatever that gift is, put every decision in your life, make the decision to find the gift. It's not about having the gift, it's not about finding the gift, it's making the decision to find it. That's the first part of success. The second one is the day that you find your gift, exploit it in the service of others. Really push yourself to use that gift to the end of your ability. But there's a third part to success that a lot of people don't talk about, is once you've done the first two, create a space for other people to find their gift. It's not enough that you found your gift and you've maxed it out. I encourage you to create a space for other people who haven't found their gifts to help them find theirs. And if you do that, you're successful.
That's beautiful. Very, very wise advice. I really enjoyed this conversation, guys. If you've enjoyed it as well, just as much as I have, please be sure to hit the like and subscribe button so we can get more amazing guests as well. Finally, where can people find you?
Yeah, Linda, this is such a great show. Thanks for having me on the podcast. Really appreciate it. Easy way to keep in touch. DM me directly on Instagram. So my Master Talk handle on Instagram is Master Your Talk. So that's YOUR, Master Your Talk. Just send me a DM and let me know what you enjoyed from this episode, and I'll reply with a voice message.
Perfect. Thank you. Thank you so much for your time, Brenden.
Thanks, Linda. Such a pleasure.